On today's episode, Tough Mudder discontinues the 5K, 10K, and 15K event format. We talk about it all with Tough Mudder CEO Giles Chater and the Senior Director of Global Brand and Product, Chris Maltbie.
This is the world's toughest podcast. Welcome to the world's toughest podcast, where we talk about any obstacle course race you'd like, as long as that's world's toughest mudder. Each week we talk to members of the WTM community and share stories of success and failure in the single greatest event in OCR. My name is Will Hicks, and this is the world's toughest podcast.
Welcome back to World's Toughest Podcast. My name is Will Hicks. It's been a minute. Thanks for tuning back in. I talked with the Tough Mudder CEO, Giles Chater, and Chris Maltbie, the Senior Director of Global Brand and Product. Basically, they're the two guys. Anything you see on a course is because, well, maybe they didn't put it there, but it passed through their fingers. They wanted to talk about a big change coming next year to Tough Mudder. We're going to get to it in just one second. But the short story is 5K, 10K, and 15K Tough Mudder events are going away. They're returning to the 10-mile. A Tough Mudder is 10 plus miles. And that's what it was. Every single Tough Mudder from the day it started in 2010 until Tough Mudder Half debuted in 2016. It was 10 miles or it was World's Toughest Mudder. And those were your two choices. And since 2016, they talk about kind of the progression. 2016 is when Tough Mudder Half came out, which was a half Tough Mudder. But that caused its own confusion because, if you tell most runners, hey, I ran a half, they think you ran a half marathon, which is 13 miles. A Tough Mudder Half is 5 miles, 6 miles, half of a regular. Anyway, we talk about that whole, and then they introduced the 5K, the 10K, the 15K. I was talking to somebody about this. Hey, did you ever run any of the shorter distances? No, I just ran Tough Mudder Full. Tough Mudder Full, that term only was a thing because Tough Mudder Half was a thing. And then for a while it was Tough Mudder Classic, which is the 15K / 10 plus mile distance. 15K is a hair under 10 miles. I know that. Anyway, tons of information. Let me give you my email address if you want to talk about this. will@theocrreport.com. You can follow us at the OCR Report. And I want to talk about something real cool we started since our last episode of the podcast, the OCR Report Patreon. We want OCR to be here for the next 100 years. We, meaning the OCR Report. World's Toughest Podcast is a part of the OCR Report. I want my grandkids to run World's Toughest Mudder, right? I mean, maybe they won't. I want them to be able to run World's Toughest Mudder if they want to. We want the sport to be around for the next 100 years. So if you want to support that goal, if you want to support the sport that you love, go to patreon.com/the OCR Report and become a member of the OCR Report. Less than $5 a month. There's tons of perks and benefits and cool stuff. If you go to the OCR Report Instagram page, you'll see tons of new members. And we would love to have you be one of them with us. Less than $5 a month to support the sport we love. Before we talk with Giles and Chris, let's read some iTunes reviews.
5 stars.
5 stars.
5 stars.
5 stars.
5 stars.
5 stars. 5 stars.
No iTunes reviews today, except for one. Do you watch Succession? No spoilers, I promise. This next audio clip, a guy throws a bunch of newspapers down in front of Kieran Culkin's character. Kieran Culkin, Macaulay Culkin's brother, yes. And he's talking to his sister about the reviews.
No, the reviews are in.
Yeah, they're mostly 5 star.
Succession is one of the most highly praised shows on TV right now. And I'm not saying it's because they listen to World's Toughest Podcast, but I'm not saying it.
5-star.
That is Australian actress Sarah Snook
5-star.
playing Siobhan Roy on Succession.
5-star.
And this
5 stars.
is Rhea Coble, World's Toughest Mudder 2-time champion, OCR superstar.
5 stars.
5-star.
5 stars.
5-star.
5 stars.
Can't really play both at the same time. All right. Enough of that. I share my thoughts on the big change for next year with Tough Mudder during our interview with Giles and Chris. If I were to summarize, though, here's what I think. I think ultimately it's a good thing for the long-term success of Tough Mudder, but it is a big swing. Giles and Chris talk about it. 5K is a great term for search engine optimization. So I'm interested to see the reaction from the community. Before this podcast went live, we posted about it on the OCR Report Instagram, and the initial response has been positive from the community. People are excited. I told some people in my office about it that we're planning on running a 5K, Tough Mudder 5K later this year. And they're actually excited about it. They're like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, it's not about your time. It's about finishing together, and it's about completing a challenge. 10 miles is a challenge for most people. So anyway, I would love to know what you hear about it, what you think about it after you hear it. Go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leave a review, leave your comments, and I will read them on a future episode. Let's get to the interview. It's time to talk with Giles Chater and Chris Maltbie. Let's go to the phones. Giles Chater is the Chief Executive Officer of Tough Mudder. Chris Maltbie is the Senior Director of Global Brand and Product at Tough Mudder. Giles and Chris are the brains behind everything you see on course at Tough Mudder. Always a pleasure to talk with Giles and Chris. Welcome, guys.
Hello, Will.
Thanks for having us. If, amongst other things, we get the absolutely best introductions with you. What a way to start. I hope we can live up to that.
You are very kind. It is an honor always to talk with you guys. I saw Chris on a course. I don't know, it was last year, Chris. I saw you down at Lake Elsinore.
Yes.
A couple times. And I saw you at Crybaby. And you're like, I was Crybaby. And I was like, it's terrible, as always. And anyway, it's good to see you.
We like to go out and watch the craft in action. So always a pleasure.
Giles, I haven't talked with you since World's Toughest last year. How has Tough Mudder been the last 6 months or so?
It's been busy. There's been a lot going on. You know, we are trying to navigate a business through what's been a pretty challenging couple of years. And even though COVID feels like it's a long time ago, we basically kicked all of the COVID problems down the road, and we're trying to deal with them now. We're finally tripping over that can, whilst at the same time just trying to steer Tough Mudder in the direction we would like it to go, which is part of what we would love to chat through with you today.
Well, tell me about that. You guys teased me through email that there's some big changes coming for 2024. Chris, what are the big changes we can look forward next year?
Yeah, so the biggest one, we'll get out of the way up front, which is, after quite a bit of thought and planning for the future, we've decided to discontinue our shorter distance formats. So for 2024, the 5, 10, and 15K, separate distance formats will be going away, and we'll be coming back with, what's hopefully familiar and exciting to a lot of people, which is a single format that's 10 plus miles, simply called Tough Mudder. It's been, quite a road over the past 13 years or so as we've sort of worked through different iterations and rolled out products, from Tough Mudder half to eventually 5K, 10K, 15K, various city formats, a bunch of different things. And after really putting our heads together and looking at the value we think Tough Mudder can provide, we sort of made, what we think is a really important decision to take Tough Mudder back to something that's universally really challenging, tons of value, and ultimately leaves people crossing the finish line feeling like they just did something they didn't think they could accomplish, but they pulled it off. That's
a big, so no more 5Ks, no more 10Ks starting next year. That's a big change.
It is a big change, and sort of counter to the direction, that we've sort of slowly gone with time. I think it's the first time we're really going to fewer formats rather than more. But I know you've been around the brand a long time. You've been coming out to Worlds and Tough Mudder events forever. Hopefully there's that little anchor in your brain of the way it sort of changed with time. And a lot of those changes were good. We're really proud with what we've done with events like 5K, 10K. I think we do 5K in a very Tough Mudder flavor, especially starting last year when we put electricity, ice, all of that on the course. But the more we thought about it, the more we realized there's some things you just don't get out of a shorter format experience that we think are really sort of a necessary component of Tough Mudder, and in a very different way than Spartan is really tough, right? Spartan is tough because you're racing. A super fast 5K where you're trying to eke out every second is way different than a 5K where you're stopping to help teammates, where you're sort of pacing yourself and you're doing a lot more sort of mentally taxing things along the way. And so we felt to get the most out of it, but the unique value Tough Mudder delivers, one
Sure.
format, long, super hard, was the way for us to go.
It's a big change because, like, when you, Chris, you've run Tough Mudder for a long time too, even before you worked for the company, maybe.
Yeah.
But when I started, it was 10 miles or World's Toughest Mudder. Like, that was it. There was no underneath. There was no in between. That was kind of, and this seems more like almost like a throwback to like 2016, 2015 days. Even before that, like 2012 day, like Tough Mudder half came in what, 2016?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
So this is like, for me, is like a, who's done it, guy who's done it a long time. Like, I'm like, okay, that's fine. Like, but I can see where if someone's never run Tough Mudder, 10 miles is a long time or long distance, right? Is there any worry of losing those kind of the first timers or the people scared about 10 miles?
Not a worry so much. Our philosophy here is that everybody can achieve more than they believe. And particularly if they are doing it and they are supported by other people. And given the option, somebody in the back of their mind, right, the infamousy, the value of Tough Mudder has caught their imagination and they want to get involved, and they're given, as a new customer, the opportunity to pick one of our current distances. A lot of them are picking 5K. And they can do so much more. And when they have the interaction with the brand, the kind of the long term, the feeling they have, the way they connect with it, if they've picked that 5K route, is just not the same as the way they might have connected with it back in 2012, 2013. And that's the way we want them to connect. We believe they can. Sure, we're going to have people that say, look, I can only do 5K, and I just don't buy it. Surrounded by the community that we have with other people, they can do it. There was also a time, where people would consider training for Tough Mudder. And, I think we can bring that back. And if you do put the work in, then even at a longer distance, you're going to have a thoroughly satisfying experience. You might just have to pay for some of that up front. If you don't, then you're going to be paying for it on the day. But I still feel that you will be able to, do far more than you believe. And that's where we want to go.
One thing I could see is that someone who says, oh yeah, I can do a 5K, I'll sign up for a 5K. That same person might think, well, I can't do 10 miles by myself, but maybe I can bring somebody with me, or maybe I can bring, a couple buddies from work. Or my very first Tough Mudder in Southern California was with my siblings. I ran for the four of us. We got t-shirts and we wore our oldest, crummiest tennis shoes. And I think we even duct taped the ankles, like you do. And I don't think I would have run it by myself, but I was happy to go, with my family, with people I know. I think you might get more groups that way even.
Yeah, and I think that's something, we've always seen. There's usually one anchor in the group that is conning everybody into coming out. And, you've got a team of 10 people coming. One of them is really into this idea and probably the most prepared. And the other ones show up on site saying, what have we gotten into? But invariably they get to the end of it, and they've had a more meaningful experience having done the thing they didn't think they could. I think there's an interesting equivalency we see actually with, something like World's Toughest. which is sort of to Giles' point of if you give someone the option of a 5K or a 10K, they may just round down to the 5K. We see a disproportionate number of people at World's Toughest doing 50 miles. More people do 50 than 45. And that's simply because that's where we've put a reward, right? And so you already see this sort of trend where people can naturally push further. They've got all this gas in their tank that they need to have drawn out of them. And by sort of putting that stake in the ground with a longer format, we're sort of conning people into digging a little deeper and having that more meaningful experience.
When the 5Ks and 10Ks first came out or first were starting to roll out, Chris, it might have been you that told me one of the benefits of having a 5K format was that there were venues you guys could go into that you can't with a 10-mile course or a 15K course. Is that a factor at all, or does that really matter anymore?
I think it remains, relevant for perhaps, but not super important. I think there's these unintended consequences we bumped into with shorter formats where sure, it opens up more venues you can go to, but maybe those venues aren't quite as good as an ideal Tough Mudder venue, right? Maybe we can't build all of the obstacles we would at a prime venue where we can dig and we can do all those sorts of things. And so what you gain in access, you can sort of lose in, the reality of what you end up planning and producing. I think we're at a place as a business where we have the ability to seek out venues that will provide the perfect experience, and that should be more of a focus than broadened access. So as appealing as that was, at the time, I think we've sort of rediscovered the importance of the core experiences we want to deliver.
Giles, you think you're going to say something?
Yeah, I think unintended consequences is a phrase Chris and I have been using quite a bit of late. We made a number of decisions as a business, which I think were the right decision for the business, but not necessarily the right decision for the brand. If it's really difficult to find the ideal long format venue, and so you take the venue that's easier to sign, easier to find, easier to manage, but only fits short format, right? It works for the business, but it impacts on the brand. There are a whole bunch of other kind of processes that have changed over the years driven by that. The reason that we don't put 15K on Sundays is it allows the team to start packing up the 15K course on the Saturday, which means you make use of your construction crew on the Sunday rather than having them sit idle. Great for the business, not so great for the brand or the customer experience. And there are numerous decisions which we've made in isolation as a business over a number of years. 5K is easier on search terms online and for drawing new customers in than half was, but it's also less of an overall experience. 10K wedges in between the two. Again, it's easier from a search perspective and a customer acquisition perspective, but it doesn't quite fit. And as we look back at the sum of all of these really sensible decisions in the moment, we just find ourselves not quite where we would like to be. And it's quite a big whole-scale change to get us back where we would like to be. But I think both Chris and I feel really strongly that we need to be brand-led and experience-led in our decisions if we are going to really solidify Tough Mudder's position long-term as something meaningful and enduring and as a real badge of honor that's recognized just across the space.
I love the 10-mile experience. One talking about little kind of different experiences with Tough Mudder over the years. One was the 2-loop format. Do you remember that, Chris?
I'm proud that I left the organization before we did that, and I returned after we had done away with it. But yes, I know of its infamy.
So there's no.
I was sitting in the room. I don't tell this story very often, but I remember I was actually in the office in Brooklyn at the time, and Will comes into the office, and Nolan was heading up product, and we had a number of senior people around the table, and Will kind of made this speech about how now was the time for discourse. He's like, here's his idea, and it's going to save us lots of money because we'll only need to, drive one set of construction crew, and there are all these like business efficiencies. And he's like, I want to hear what everybody says, and there's this idea that we all supported this in Tough Mudder, but it was community dissent that made the kind of about turn. Like everybody in the room with just an hour or so of like, this is a terrible idea. And at the end of it, Will was like, great chat. We now all need to get on the same page and back this because the decision is.
When we say Will, it was not me, Will Hicks. It was previous Will.
Another Will, he who must not be named.
So what about the other format, like Tough Mudder Kids still be around, or Little Mudder in the UK?
Sure, and what you might have seen is that we're not running Tough Mudder Kids alongside the main Tough Mudder weekend in North America anymore. We had the one early on in the season. There won't be any more. I think Tough Mudder Kids is a really excellent product, but it also drives a whole bunch of compromises, some of which are around the kids themselves. So if you think that maybe that experience is now a little bit more, but to find the right venue, as Chris described, we might need to be further out. As a parent, I wouldn't consider driving 2 hours to give my child an hour's experience that's largely in an adult event to drive 2 hours back. It just doesn't work. And so what we want to do is pick that up and have that standalone in places where it can be experienced regularly. Also, as you capture the imagination of young people, and if you really want to get them into the sport, having something that comes through once a year into their states or something that others got to fly to just doesn't make sense. So I think there is a different model there as we think about it from the kids' experience. From the adults' experience as well, if you've just finished this massive adventure with your team that's left you all broken, but in a great way, and you've crossed the finish line and you've been crowned and you've got your finisher drink, and it frankly doesn't matter what you're drinking because it's the celebration, like what you've put into it that's really giving you that feeling. And you're buzzing and you're telling your stories and you're laughing at your friend that fell off everything. And you get into the rinse station, you turn around and there's like a 6-year-old in there giggling. It just takes the edge off the experience that we're trying to create here. You think about the language we can use. We don't want to be vulgar, but there's just a difference if you're trying to align those two experiences. I don't think we can do either justice together. And both deserve justice because they're both really valuable.
I agree with everything you just said, Giles. And I also remember when I took my son to Tough Mudder, like when he was like 7, 8, and it was a great, maybe like the world's toughest mudder hot lap. Maybe that's a model. Like keep the day kids on their own. I don't know. I love the Tough Mudder Kids. I think it's a great experience also. Giles, you mentioned Sundays. Will Tough Mudder still be on Sundays going forward?
It will. There will only be one Tough Mudder, and it will be on Saturday and Sunday. We're not going to limit the experience. We will find another way to deal with the operational challenges that provides. And you will have seen, as we move back in this direction, there's obviously a line in the sand for 2024, but we're looking to make a number of changes in year. We sold 5, 10, and 15K for this year already. It's not the kind of thing you can make in-year whole-scale change, but we will see increases in distance, increases in difficulty, increases in just interest and challenge, and we will also see some more 15K on Sundays a little bit more regularly through the year as well.
Will we be calling it the 15K, or is it tough? What's the name for it next year?
Tough Mudder. Again, unintended consequences. As we put multiple formats in place, starting with Tough Mudder Half, and we could spend a little while talking about where we went wrong. I think that was, in fact, hang on, just humor me for a second. So the idea with Tough Mudder Half is we have this product, Tough Mudder. It's great. We love it. But it's difficult to convince people. I'm sure Chris will be back. It is difficult to convince people to do something quite as challenging as this. So we're going to put this entry product on to kind of wean them into the product, primarily to help with our marketing efforts. But then the thought was, if people can't do the full thing, they're basically some kind of inferior human being. So we'll make it shorter, and we won't put electricity on the half course because it's scary. And we won't put ice on because they won't like ice either. These somehow lesser humans. Like the whole thought process behind it was just flawed. And then you had all the half of what, how does it work? And having introduced that, we ran into a whole bunch of naming headaches. Fast forward a bit, we fixed the half issue by making it 5K, which helped from SEO and a couple of other pieces. But then we still had this product which wasn't quite Tough Mudder. We improved that by bringing EST and a number of other things. But with multiple products, we then had to put distance as the leading differentiator. And the reason I told that full story is Tough Mudder is not about distance. The fact that we're not a race, we're not a competition, gives us a lot of flexibility. I'd love to hand over to Chris in a moment to just chat about that. We don't want we want the experience to be defined by what you experience in the sense of achievement at the end, not by any specific distance. And Chris has some thoughts about how that allows us to be more thoughtful and deliberate with product design as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that goes into making the Tough Mudder experience what it is, right? And it, like Giles mentioned, the distance never was a good lead. 15 kilometers up a ski mountain is not the same as 15 kilometers running at sea level, right? And the obstacles that go on the course, what that complement is. In the same way, when we get too caught up on specific numbers, it sort of disincentivizes designing an experience that delivers the most value to the customer. Another example is, defining our each format by the number of obstacles on the course. If you say 30 obstacles, you're not saying what they are, and you're not saying how big and bad and hard and engaging and unique they are, right? You're just saying there's this number, and it incentivizes you to mix up your design and just put out stuff there to hit your number, rather than saying, what's the absolute best, toughest iteration of Tough Mudder that we can put out there for customers to experience. So, but not leading anymore, for next year, even though the distance we're going with is, closest to what's 15K now, we're not naming it as such because maybe it's 10 miles, maybe it's 13, maybe it's up a ski mountain, maybe it's flat. Will, you might remember, I don't know if you ever found yourself at one of those early Tough Mudder events where it was sort of unknown and you ended up out there, and after you were on course for 5 hours, you're like, how long was that course? And was like, oops, we it was 15 miles by accident. Those are some of the courses that get the most buzz, from Tough Mudder history. So, this really does allow us to think a little bit more broadly about the experience we want to deliver. I don't think it's a coincidence when we look at, sort of customer behavior, right? Our highest repeat rates are with things like World's Toughest. A lot of the crowd that shows up at World's Toughest every year is the same group. And we get new people in that get to experience it, and then they're very likely to come back. But it's a heavy repeat base there. If you look at what's currently 15K, that has a higher repeat rate than 10K, has a higher repeat rate than 5K. And I think that all ties back to the value and the weight of the experience. The more accomplished you feel, the more bought in you are, the more you bond with people on course because you need to work together to get to the finish line. All adds up to this thing that builds a really strong brand and a strong community. And frankly, a strong business around that. So I think as we look, into next year and we have this one flexible, tough format that's defined by the value of the experience and not by a specific distance or obstacle count or anything else, it really lets us do right by the customer by providing what they expect or deserve.
This seems like a big swing. Like it will either work out great, like absolutely, like more buy-in, more repeat customers, or there's in my mind, and again, I haven't been like in the weeds of like, but there's also like, oh man, we're going to lose the 5K SEO. We're going to lose the, is there any concern that like, hey, this will be a boom or bust kind of thing?
I don't think there's real risk of bust. We've certainly modeled out and expected it to be a decrease in customers. I don't think it will be as severe as we forecast, but we can absorb a pretty severe drop in customers if need be. I think it is more important long term to do the right thing, to build a solid foundation that is going to endure, than to try and prioritize how we've built this business and this brand on who are the easiest customers to acquire. There's also something we don't talk about very often, but volume is not the only thing that matters if you think about this commercially. The average ticket price for short format customers is a fraction of what it is for longer format, and there's still a cost of acquisition associated with them. And so once you allow for lower tickets, cost of acquisition, and the fact that the level of the achievement just doesn't translate to lifetime value in the same way the longer format does, and so we're not seeing the repeat rates or the lifetime values, the economics are not as attractive as you would imagine. So whilst it's great for headline numbers and, to be able to talk to growth, and if we were to write business articles about, being the best CEO ever, it's lovely, but a lot of that isn't real. And I think we believe in the strength of the business model around this brand and this move than we do the other way. And we are happy to have a smaller business if that's the outcome, but I don't think it will be.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think if the cost per acquisition for a 5K customer and a 15K customer is pretty much the same, then why don't, absolutely put your money into the 15K customer 100%.
And I think, one thing we haven't talked about explicitly, but, Will, maybe you've noticed over the past couple months is a reposition in the way we represent the brand, whether it's in paid ads, whether it's, the website, it's on our social channels. This is sort of a 360 repositioning. Giles and I feel very strongly about this, about Tough Mudder sitting very authentically in the space. And, a couple of years ago, there was sort of this pivoting in the way we presented ourselves as being more fun party vibes, fun day in the sun, which, in my view was effectively, we're selling to an audience that isn't really going to get the most out of Tough Mudder, right? It's almost like a trick. Someone comes expecting to have a day at the beach, and then we slap them with 10,000 volts and put them through ice water. It's not the challenge they signed up for. And we don't want to trick people, right? We want to be very upfront. This is going to be incredibly hard. You remember the big signs that used to be out front when you came into the events that said, remember you signed a death waiver. Like, we would put it really in your face that this was going to be a hard time for you for the day. And so, I think part of the product shift we're talking about, both for this year when we're making things substantially more difficult and into next year when we're going to be going to the one longer format, is making sure that we're consistent across the board. The value of the brand, the value of the product are all sort of tied up in themselves. And it's really important for us, to go back to our roots and be authentic with both.
Sometimes things only make sense when you're looking back on them. And now that you mentioned that, now that we're talking about this, some of the OCR report, we have a private chat group, and we've been talking hey, have you guys noticed the Tough Mudder social? They're getting kind of sassy lately. It's a noticeable shift in tone on the marketing, even before you and I have talked.
Yeah, and it's absolutely deliberate. A big part of what made Tough Mudder so successful over the years is the social currency attached to the brand. People understand what Tough Mudder is and what it represents in a tone of voice, in an achievement, and we eroded a little bit of that as completing a Tough Mudder became slightly less than it was. And it's really important that we bring that back, and the image in the market needs to represent the experience that is being delivered. And so as we increase difficulty and challenge and really invest again in the value of that achievement, both to people individually and more broadly, how it's perceived, we need to ensure that the way we represent Tough Mudder into the external world reflects that.
You mentioned increasing difficulty and challenge. Other than going back to the kind of classic distance, what are the courses going to look like? What are the obstacles going to look like? What can we expect next year?
So some of those changes, like I mentioned, are already underway, and a lot of them are simple but really important. We spent a lot of time looking back from 2010 to now at obstacles that we've had around for sort of the full length of the brand, and just the way this experiences have migrated with time. And so there's a reset in a lot of those places. One we talk about a lot is Arctic Enema. Arctic Enema used to just be a dumpster full of ice, and it was always chock full of ice. You popped up, it would damn near send you into shock. It was so intensive. And then, we innovated with time and we added the tubes that you would slide in, well, as we got further and further from the sort of introduction of that obstacle, it started to turn into just a slide into kind of cold water, but there was less ice. It was a bigger pit. It was a pool in the ground, and the experience became more about the slide and not about the ice. And so that's one already where we're shifting back. We have smaller pits that stay much more dense with ice. You jump in, you have to fully duck under a wooden baffle. Gets back to the value of Arctic Enema in the context of Tough Mudder. It's not about a water slide. It's about the fear that comes with looking at that pit of ice. Maybe you're already cold, going through the shock you get, and then that euphoria you feel on the other side, having gone through it. Electroshock therapy, is another one. We've already increased the density of wires in there substantially. We've added higher gauge wires that, kick up to that are a little thicker like they used to be. They're closer to ropes and ribbons than they are to like those really thin gauge wires. And we're continually looking at ways to get that experience back to that classic, like you're standing there, you're anticipating, Clinton's probably like talking a little trash at you, and you hype yourself up and you run through. As some of the redesigns kicked in with that and small tweaks and changes to the experience, we've seen more and more people just kind of get on their belly and crawl through. And electroshock's not about that. It's about hyping yourself up, blasting through that, and it's the last obstacle for a reason. You should come through that just exhausted, but flying so high that you cross the finish line, you get crowned with a headband, and you have that, full sense of achievement. Things like Kiss of Mud, we've dropped the barbed wire on that probably 6 inches. So you're really properly flat on your belly, dragging yourself through. We've extended the length of it, a minimum of twice the distance of what it used to be. So when you come out the other side, again, truly exhausted. There's really no space for you to lay on your side and roll through. There's certainly none of the like crawling on all fours. So it's a lot of like basic small changes that just get us back to the original intention of these simple features we have. Now, in addition to that, we're kicking back up to the Obstacle Innovation Program. So we've been rolling out a couple of new things. We brought back Augustus Gloop, but now it's with this tube net design that's much harder to get up. You're not just climbing up a ladder, but you're actually sort of like wriggling through this net. It's a nice way to add difficulty and length of experience there. We've got some updates to some of our like just the tip hanging tough type obstacles coming later this year to make them substantially more difficult. So it's much more of a badge of honor if you manage to reach the end, but with iterative achievements along the way. So there's sort of big and small ways that we're trying to address this, but to add up to the overall experience, we want. And I think one of the things that we're really keen on is mental challenge often leads to some of the physical wear down you see at our events. And it's one that at least I lost sight of for a while, right? Which is knowing that at some point you're going to need to crawl through electric eel is just this burden on your brain that tires you out as you go. I think you see it in a very visceral way at a World's Toughest Mudder where you know exactly what's coming every lap. And at least for me, I was always going through the checklist in my head of like, where's the 1 or 2 obstacles on course that I'm dreading? And like you have this, it wears you down as you get closer to the thing that you've been dreading, which means when you finally cross the finish line, you've got this like sense of relief, but you're also just dead from the experience more than you would be just from running the distance or climbing over the walls. Like you are mentally and physically wiped, which leads into that celebration that feels really worthwhile.
And there's a narrative at the moment that, Chris and I are just sitting here trying to be mean to people. And we're certainly not looking to add cruel and unusual punishment anywhere, but we really believe in that. The pledge is a commitment at the start of the event to how you were going to approach it with your peers. And there's a line in there that I overcome all fears. If there isn't stuff in course that is genuinely scary, then there's no real overcoming of fears. Putting water up to the brim in cage crawl, for me, if you can just breeze through and it's kind of a fun float on your back, it's not the same as having a moment of panic under the mop heads. You're like, when am I going to be able to breathe? As you're in that queue and you're looking at the obstacle and you see someone ahead of you freak out and have to lift the panel up, that just plays with your mind in a way that when you make the decision to get in, you've chosen to do something challenging and you feel so good for making that decision over and over again. The other obstacle of that really stands out for me is trench warfare. Because someone is going to say, you can only really make Tough Mudder again if you spend millions of dollars on massive obstacles. And we certainly do need to continue to bring back new and innovative obstacles. But if you take something like trench warfare, it used to be a point where you were in a really narrow trench. It was completely pitch black. As you crawled through, you weren't sure what you were crawling into. So you started putting your hand out as you went away. Am I going to bash into a wall? What's going on? Might have been so tight at times. You're like, am I going to get stuck in here? This is horrible. I'm in the dark. We started digging at the width of a standard excavator bucket because that's the easiest way to dig it and in straight lines and not covering it. And so you've gone from what is a pretty terrifying crawl in the dark, underground, zigging back, wondering when you're going to get out, to what's just another baby crawl through mud. It does not cost us any more to dig that hole narrow and constricted and twisting and dark. But boy, does it change the experience for people who are claustrophobic or uncomfortable in the dark. That becomes a real obstacle, as opposed to that at Atlanta. We didn't get the build right, and I was running or walking because I dislike running, and I got to it, and I was like, I'm not even going in. That offends me, and so I walked past. But it is not all about throwing money at it every time. I think we can make adjustments to even the smallest obstacles to make a really big difference.
Those are two good examples of obstacles that can be either really easy and kind of like, oh, this one's a break from the hard obstacles, or they can be talking about cage crawl and talking about trench warfare, or they can be literally terrifying. Cage crawl for years after it first came out was my least favorite obstacle. It was just awful. It's one of the few obstacles that doesn't have electricity that can literally like get the stress level where you're like, am I gonna die? I don't think they couldn't have this out there if I could die, right? But then you like, I don't know, people drown every day. Like that's a real thing. Like, and trench warfare can be terrifying when it's zigzaggy and there's no light getting in and it's dark. You know, on a regular Tough Mudder, you don't have headlamps. You have no idea what's going on under there. So yeah, I think that's great. I'm looking forward to seeing both of those on course.
No obstacle should be a break. Your running between the obstacles can be a break, but there's no point in us building them if it is if it's a relaxing part of your experience on course. They're there to be obstacles. How
many obstacles are we looking for on a Tough Mudder Classic next year? Is that even the right question? Like, is it going to be just depends on the course, or do you have a minimum, maximum range?
So yeah, we have one in mind. I was pausing for a moment, not around the obstacle count question, but around the use of the term classic, which will raise Giles' stress levels. But you used it for good reason. This is the traditional Tough Mudder experience going back to the early days. So the obstacle counts, we're probably looking at something like 20 plus, which is meant to be at least 20 substantial obstacles on the course. There's things we can do out there to mix up the experience that, maybe we don't count as an obstacle per se. But we want to make sure that when we're designing really intensive, good, engaging, on brand, innovative obstacles, that, we're hitting a count of great experiences, not just trying to add numbers up.
And as you will know, right, because everybody does this in the OCR space, people put obstacle counts in not driven by the experience they're trying to deliver, but because it helps sell tickets. It's entirely a marketing gimmick. And then you end up counting hero carry and killer gorilla and bucket carry and sandbag carry and like random press ups in a field. And I mean, sure, right, we could make it 50 and just have a whole bunch of that stuff, because that probably helps us sell tickets. But to Chris's point, we are trying to get back to a place where our teams can be experience-led in the design on site. And that includes using natural features a little bit more than we used to. It's very difficult to make a natural feature count as a named obstacle, but thoughtful use of natural features is a really good way to make the overall experience. And actually a couple of the smaller obstacle course races, I think, do a much better job at it than Tough Mudder have over the years. And that's because we've got the team, out chasing tick boxes in a number of cases, as opposed to allowing their experience and creativity to come through. And we want to free them up a little bit to do that more.
I was looking at the schedule for next year before our talk this morning, and I was looking at the two Southern California venues. There's Glen Helen Raceway, which has some of the hardest terrain of any Tough Mudder course that I've run. And then the other Southern California course is Lake Elsinore, which may be the flattest course I've ever, maybe Chicago's a little bit flatter, but between those two, you have the kind of the gamut where you almost need to add more obstacles or more difficult obstacles to Lake Elsinore to make up for, I think one year at Glen Helen, they just stuck a sign in the bottom that said Death March. Like, this is an obstacle, and it counted, like it was real. No one was running up those hills at Glen Helen.
I think that's exactly right.
Sorry, Chris. There's a venue in the UK, Badminton, which is where they run the horse trials, and it's a bit like that. It is flat, but not only is it flat, it's manicured grass that is extra soft so that the horses are able to horse trial over it safely. And for me, that's always one where I'm like, how do we make this interesting and challenging? It's also stunning. It's a lovely location. That is going to be significantly longer than 10 miles.
So distances for next year, we have. Oh, I said classic, and I meant classic like with a small c. But I know like there was an official Tough Mudder Classic years ago. So going forward, starting 2024, it's Tough Mudder, which is a 10+ mile course, 20+ obstacles, including ice water and electricity, and you get an orange headband at the end and a finisher T-shirt. I'm guessing we're not going to do that again, right?
Yes, indeed. Finisher. This is all about learning from the past. Will. Finisher T-shirts and headbands, and the headband is one we're really excited to bring back. Actually, obviously we have the 15K headband right now is orange, but one thing we've been discussing quite a bit is the experience when you cross the finish line. And I'm sorry if you guys talked about this in the brief time I got kicked off, but
no.
If you think back to the experience of finishing a Tough Mudder 7 years ago, you came across the finish line and you were just crowned with a headband, and that orange headband was like, yes, you got a T-shirt and other stuff, but like that was the symbol of what you did. And then you worked at the office on Monday, and we had headband Mondays and all of that sort of thing. But that finish line experience itself, by the operational nature of having multiple formats, had to get dialed back when we started doing more things, because you cross the finish line, you're all excited, and then a volunteer has to ask you if you did 5K or 15K or 10K, and so there's this break in the experience where you're answering questions and you're getting a different headband, and it's completely different than coming across the finish line and being crowned. So we're having this conversation about what the headband design looks like for next year, and we'll work on that. But the idea of just having one iconic orange headband that we're crowning every single person with when they come across the finish line, it really gets me excited, because it's it's like the pinnacle of the day. Once you've come through a hard course.
I know there's business considerations and sponsorships you can sell on the headbands, but one of the things I treasure from my years of Tough Mudder is my very first orange headband. It's just orange, and it literally just says Tough Mudder in like block letters. Doesn't say anything. There's no brought to you by. It's just a simple. And I know. I don't know if those days are gone or not, but it's the simple small c classic look of it that I love.
Those days are not gone. Those days are coming back. And even the fact that we had to start using the term classic and full, they all came. It was in introducing half. You're like, oh, if this is half, then the other one's full. And then you're like, full's a silly name for it. Now you got 5K. Oh, the other one's the classic experience to try. We made a mess. I don't know. There was a period in time where we have different finisher shirts, but then the only way to administer that was 2 different finish shoots. And then you're trying to have to filter people out with a split on course just before the finish line. We created a whole bunch of unintended moments that just took away from the experience. There's something powerful in simplicity.
I was going to say there's a correlation to something on course that I have a very strong opinion on. Philosophically, which is what we used to do around level up lanes. And I, for one, loathe them as a concept. And you'll notice there have been far less or none of them for the most part on our courses. And the reason I don't like them is because it creates this weird bifurcation in the experience, in the same way where it's like, if you got to such and such obstacle, did you do the hard one or the easy one? What percentage of the Tough Mudder experience did you do? Did you take all the easy options? Did you take all the hard ones? And we don't need to be making those decisions on the course. We should be presenting challenges that are truly hard. And therefore, when you cross the finish line at the end of the Tough Mudder, everyone knows exactly what you did. It's the same for distance. It's the same for obstacle design on course. You did the full thing. Whatever it took, however deep you had to dig, however much training you did or didn't do and suffered through once you got there on course, it all nets out to one experience that has universal currency and is just understood. So yeah, you should see that full round.
We got there from a really good place. I think we asked the right questions and we provided answers with best intentions. We wanted everybody to be able to experience, the experience that provides a unique challenge for themselves. And then all of a sudden you've got 3 different heights on Everest. But actually, on reflection, we shouldn't be lowering barriers or difficulty. What we need to do is help the community rally around people as needed. Everybody can overcome this, but not everybody will choose to, and we are fine with that.
What does Everest look like next year?
So we're doing a little bit of design work on it right now, and there's some rather technical elements to the North American design right now. The way we redesigned it, that changed the curvature a bit. For the most part, what we're planning on for next year is somewhat of a return to what was once called Everest 2.0, but a nice quality quarter pipe there that gives you a good shot at feeling like you can reach the top, but that's nice and slick, and with the the rollback at the top as sort of the key experience. It's a really interesting one, actually. For a while, and in some iterations, there was the level up plane that had a bar on it for Everest. You would think by the nature of that bar being there that it was harder because it was higher, but in reality, that's often if you can do a pull up, it's an easier experience because it's not that rock back. You can actually just like run part of the way up, and if you're tall like I am, you can just jump up and grab it. You do a little bit of a muscle up and you roll over the top. So we're going back to sort of that quality experience of running up, and then there's the hump around the back. You either really need to reach or you need to grab a hand to get up and go over. Similarly, things that might have shown up in the past, like ropes, we're essentially eliminating across the board because, again, they change that experience. What's really cool about Everest is if you can get up and over it solo, it's pretty impressive. I think everyone likes to stand and watch in the crowd as like someone just blasts over that thing. It's a real mark that person trained and got ready and has the ability. Or it's a great teamwork experience and you can't quite do it, but we'll find a way to get you over. I'm sure you've seen sometimes people are building a pyramid from the bottom to get folks up, or you've got a really nice chain of folks at the top reaching way down and getting ready to grab and hoist someone up. And that's where you see the crowd respond, right? You see the person that's having the most trouble but gets over anyway probably gets the most emotional response you see on site all day, where the entire crowd, everyone waiting to go up Everest, everyone on the top just explodes when they actually get through. So yeah, you can expect more of that next year.
There is obviously something special in helping other people. There's that classic, you help the old lady across the street with her shopping, right? You feel great about yourself. What we don't talk about as much is it takes a lot to accept help from other people. And I think being at the top of Everest, helping others is great. You feel awesome. But Everest also forces a lot of people to be prepared to accept help from others, which is also a really powerful emotional connection, and something in this like independent Western world, we're all one, individualistic view, I think is really, really powerful. We want the courses to almost demand a standard, the requirement to turn to others for help, yourself, and also to offer help. I say that there is no chance I can get up Everest by myself, so I am dependent on the support of others and really grateful when they do help me get up.
I'm right there with you, Giles. I finally figured out Everest 1.0, and then literally like a month later, they're like, hey, here's this rounded edge. Have fun with that. That was 7 years ago. This philosophy of kind of back to the roots, will it have any effect on World's Toughest Mudder or any of the other endurance races? How does this philosophy kind of affect the rest of the brand?
So I think starting with Worlds, I mean, it doesn't really have much of an impact on Worlds at all. Worlds is sort of unique. I think if you look back at the early years when the only two formats we had were Worlds and Tough Mudder, they were probably more similar than different in the overarching experience. They both had a lot of clout. They both sounded kind of crazy to do, and Worlds was definitely a level up. But for the average citizen, Tough Mudder was already something that felt really aspirational and crazy. So the gap between the two probably, just grew with time. But I think Worlds actually did a really good job of staying true to the Tough Mudder brand, and therefore doesn't require a massive course correction. I feel quite good and excited about the little changes we're making. We released the rules updates for Worlds this year, and some clarifications there for this year. we have a lot of obstacle innovation stuff in the works for Worlds and a lot of experiential upgrades. So, I don't think Worlds will change dramatically from a race format, but I think there'll be quality upgrades to the experience for folks that have been coming. Toughest, similarly won't change dramatically. Still overnight, similar obstacle counts. Now the courses themselves, since many of the obstacles are shared with the weekend, you can expect the same difficulty upgrades. The same, whatever. Everest will still be, a slightly tougher experience. Kiss Mud will still be lower. All of those experiences will be tougher as a result of the changes we're planning. The format that has the most change coming will be Infinity, right? Because right now that is the 5K and the 15K course. So there'll be some changes to the rules that we'll release when it gets a little closer to reflect to the fact that it's a longer course format. The shorter formats aren't there. That'll implicate the achievement awards there. It'll implicate some of the timelines and the rules in that way. So that's sort of the how it all rolls up into the endurance series. And then much like toughest, the Infinity obstacles will be harder as well, just because all of the obstacles are harder.
Does that mean back switching from kilometers back to miles in the US? Or the Infinity toughest?
Yeah. Though we've not written those changes quite yet. There's probably a little bit of thought for us to put into them around the actual course distances, but yeah, it's important for the distance of the course to correlate to the way you're achieving those. So we still have a little bit of thought to put into the mechanics of it, but likely miles there. Worlds, of course, is always miles.
Giles, how do you guys do it in the UK? Are you tracking kilometers on like toughest UK? I mean, I guess you've been recently, since we all have been, but
yes. And a number of the achievement awards that we think Infinity specifically are pegged out in kilometers, so there will need to be some change to swag and other elements as well. But on in the grand scheme of things, I'm sure we'll manage to navigate that one. Or we'll just stop putting signs out. And at some point, you'll just get to something which says, you may be halfway there, but we're not sure.
I was talking to somebody about this the other day, how the signs you mentioned, like you signed a death waiver. And I remember my first Tough Mudder, maybe my first few, signing an actual, like, I might die. Are those still a thing? Do we still sign death waivers for a Tough Mudder?
Oh, you still sign it. I believe they're digital now. Which doesn't have the heft of the paper contract.
Sure.
But technically, yes, unless I'm much mistaken, Giles.
Matt, you are signing the same waiver as you were back then. The original argument for paper waivers was somebody could claim that they'd not read the digital waiver, using the whole, hey, who reads these? But if you've gone to the effort of actually printing and physically signing a waiver, you can't really argue that
Sure.
you're not paid attention to what was written. But we got to get over paper.
Yeah.
Once I get that makes the lawyers happy, I don't think we will go back to paper.
While we're talking about signage, though, one thing that this change enables us to do, and maybe this is a sign you remember, Will, but one of my favorite signs we ever had on course was the Warrior Dash finishes here sign, 3 miles into what was always, 10, 11, 12 miles of Tough Mudder course.
Sure.
We had to remove those for obvious reasons, but we look forward to being able to poke a little fun again. I suppose not at Warrior Dash, rest in peace, but certainly to our cousins at Spartan with their sprint. So yeah, nice opportunity as we go back to one format.
Every now and then I get told that we shouldn't make fun of Spartan because we're all one company and the community just think it's a bit silly. But Chris and I don't really care because it amuses us greatly. That's ultimately the point of that also. We will continue to poke fun at Spartan, even if as an outsider you're scratching your head and going, I thought you were all the same.
My siblings and I, we still poke fun at each other. Like it's just part of the deal. You still love each other, but you could have, you could have multiple signs, Chris. You could have a Spartan Sprint finishes here, a Spartan Super finishes here. I'm not sure exactly. I mean, beasts here and there, but you can have at least 2 of them there.
Yeah, and maybe this is just me being bad natured with my family, but in my experience, you can be far more savage with your siblings. Because they still have to talk to you than you would be with a stranger. So yes, we look forward to having lots of fun with them.
Hey, as we're wrapping up, Chris, can you give us any sneak previews on World's Toughest 2023? About 6 months out.
Yes, I mean, I don't know if we've spoken since we dropped some of the, the functional updates
Yeah,
of
let's
the
talk about
event. But I think it's really important. So, I think the big change this year has changed the contender rules, and it's one I felt really passionately about, which is, traditionally everyone was on the same leaderboard at World's Toughest up until maybe 2018 or so. So if you came and you ran the most miles on the day, you were the winner. There's a couple of reasons, and I think it's similar to what we've been talking about with the other formats we have, where we made some changes and there was unintended consequences there. So we rolled out contender status originally when we were working with CBS around World's Toughest, and then eventually contender status rolled into different leaderboards altogether. And so you had an open category, and then you had contender and elite contender and all of these categories, which we still believe there's value in the idea of qualifying with an impressive achievement and being recognized on course. But we've done away with the separate leaderboards this year. So you can come, you can have never run one of our events before. You can come, if you run 120 miles and come in first place, you've won. You don't need to pre-qualify as a contender. You can still earn contender or elite contender status, but only at Infinity and Toughest events and only within year. So you've got to come to a 2023 Toughest or Infinity event and hit the minimum achievements there. This goes back, and perhaps you remember, Will, the olden days, contender was always a community term. When you were out running Worlds, if there was a line at an obstacle, someone would run up, and if they said, hey, contender, it was mostly honor system, but you'd let them go by. If they were trying to rack up 100 miles, it mattered a lot more to them that they stay on their splits and keep pace than, anyone that was just sort of, taking their time, was maybe going to take a break overnight, didn't have as much time to lose. And I think there's still real value there. If you come to a toughest event and you set a record and you earn elite contender status, like, it's probably good for people at Worlds to know at a glance, like, this guy's serious, he's trying to win. Let's let him hop to the front of this queue. So there's still some of the bragging rights and slight upgrades you get with those statuses. So getting to pick a pit space a little bit earlier so you can get a good pit space that helps support your race. Early access to the start chute, which we've traditionally done, so you can get up to the front of there. You don't get caught at the back of the pack if you're really going for mileage. And then the bib, which is mostly bragging rights, but does have a functional purpose on course. So that's a pretty big change to the way the race will function this year. The only other small thing implicated in that is Golden Carabiner challenges, which used to only apply to open participants. You couldn't do those. So the hot sauce challenges, that sort of thing. We're now making those available to everybody, but instead of a course bypass, it's to earn a little badge that's sort of literally a badge of honor to show you did some of these crazier challenges. So if you want to get stuck in doing little box of horrors and risking shocks in the middle of the night, that sort of thing, absolutely. And you'll get a little patch that, rewards you for having done that. But it doesn't, implicate the race at all as far as having shortcuts and skipping obstacles and that sort of thing.
So you're able to do the Golden Carabiner challenges, but still maintain the integrity. Everyone can do the Golden Carabiners, but still maintain the integrity of the race, where there's not an untoward advantage anywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which I think adds is a cool experience for everybody. We would get a lot of contenders asking if they could do the challenges, in years past, and they could, but they didn't get anything for it. And it was, it was an unnecessary complication, I think, of the experience. So we should smooth over that this year. But yeah, those are the big ones. The team's hitting the ground pretty soon, I think in the next couple of weeks, to do another site visit, see what, the nastiest natural features we can find down there, which is always exciting. And we're hard at work on the innovation front. We've already been earmarking some concepts that we came up with that we felt were maybe a little bit, wouldn't function as well on a normal event weekend, I should say, but are prime candidates to really mess with people at Worlds. So yeah, I think we're going to have a really good one this year.
Do you want to tease one of those concepts? You don't have to tell me everything, but just...
Here's an outrageous tease with absolutely no substance. We are about to do the second site visit for the 2024 venue, which we hope to be the long-term home of WTM, and should allow us to build a degree of ritualization and uniqueness to the event, which we've not yet been able to achieve. with venues that move. So I will leave that vagueness with you to salivate over.
So a possible permanent venue for World's Toughest coming in 2024. No promises. One of the things about triathlon is that Kona has a myth. Myth is the wrong word, but it's just saying it. People are, oh, did you race Kona? This it's just the name of a city. It's like you can go over there. Anyone can go over there and visit any time of the year, right? But when you say the city, and it could be the same thing. And I know there's logistics and there's a lot more to it than just being like, hey, we're going to do it every year at the same place. But yeah, I wouldn't hate it. I wouldn't hate knowing where I'm going every November,
There's power and symbolism to it, I think. And there's also, we've gotten little tastes of it before, right? And, we were at Raceway Park for quite a few years there, and that sort of became where people's heads went with World's Toughest. And then we were at Lake Las Vegas for a bunch of years. And at least I personally, I really liked that ritualization. You sort of knew where you were going to go to get your stuff. You might know what hotel you're going to stay at before or after. But then what it let us do is focus on the ways the courses were different every year, instead of just being like, oh, it's the same venue, it's the same race. We would do all sorts of stuff, right? The first year at Lake Las Vegas, we didn't have the cliff. And then we realized the second year, like, there's this awesome thing. What a crazy upgrade that would be. And we would switch up the way we went across the Finger Lakes every time. So it actually lets you focus on being really crafty as you get more comfortable in a space and elevating the experience and, letting the myths grow on their own. So I think it'd be exciting and good for participants, good for us.
Yeah, I could talk about that all year. I think it's a great idea because in my mind, my first World's Toughest was Vegas, and that Vegas was World's Toughest Mudder. And just the whole, part of the Vegas experience, but just, going out there in the same hotel every time and the same. And I like to travel to different venues. I went to Germany a few years ago I think Toughest and Infinities are probably, it could, if I want to see a new venue or see a new city, that's a good way to do it.
Yeah, and I think the Ironman analogy lines up there, right? Their main world championship's always in Kona. Their 70.3 championship moves all over. So, yeah, I think there's a blueprint there that's handy.
Hey, Giles, how is the international market going? I saw we have races in Germany and Australia again. What's Tough Mudder International doing?
It's doing exciting things. We've got races in China, having a break in Korea, but that should be back again next year. Mexico's been coming on board for a while. Definitely back in Germany this year, with 2 more coming in Germany for a total of 3 next year. We expect to announce France with a venue near Paris for 2024. That announcement should come in June, which is quite exciting as well. Australia back, which is great. We've got Malta. The Italians are interested. A lot of I think partnering with Spartan has given us access into their communities and the network of licensees, which I run as well. So what's actually holding us back is not the desire for the expansion, but the speed with which we can build out equipment sets. So we're limited in our European expansion at the moment currently by the kit we have and where we can get it moved. And as we try and build out new kits, we will be able to grow a little bit faster.
One quite exciting one that Giles left off is our first Filipino event coming up next month. But one of the cool things they're able to do down there is actually build a permanent facility that we're quite excited for the opportunities with. So they've got a site down there to set something up and keep it around so we can do a lot of innovation and creative work down there that I think will be quite good as well. And as we, sort of add these venues, I think one really cool and as yet unexplored avenue is the way we make some of these events destinations. So it's great to hear that you went to a German event. That's really wonderful. But as we have things like the Mudder Legion program that are all designed around getting customers to come back time and time again, I think we open opportunities for some of these more exotic locations to have really sought after sort of badges of honor, I guess, as people travel around and do more Tough Mudders outside of just the US or just the UK.
So some kind of like frequent flyer program where you go to 10 countries, you get another bib. I love those bibs.
Packet of biscuits, Will. But yes, something like that.
That's awesome. Guys, do you have anything else before we wrap up? Anything else we should tell the community about?
I mean, if they sit through an hour of Chris and I just waffling, they will have done remarkably well. They don't get a headband for it, but it is certainly hats off to them.
You can sign up for it. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, let this be the first step in their increasingly tough journey with Tough Mudder, sitting through this interview with us.
We can make them listen to it instead of Baby Shark for if we ever do another virtual one. You can sign up for a Tough Mudder near you at toughmudder.com. Giles Chater, Chris Maltbie. Thanks much.
Thanks, Will.
Well, thank you.
Special thanks to Giles Chater and Chris Maltbie for appearing in this episode. Well done, guys. Come back anytime. What do you think? Let me know in a review on Apple Podcasts or on the OCR Report Instagram page. We have a discussion thread going. No 5K, no 10K. I know 15K is like 9.3? If a 5K is 3.1? Okay, give or take. We're saying 10 miles plus. And some courses will be longer. Let me know what you think on Instagram at the OCR Report. Leave us a review. I would love to see you as a new member on Patreon. Check that out. Patreon.com/the OCR Report. I will talk with you soon. Go spend time with someone you love.